Hello, Class 702. Today we are talking about a second form of behavioral therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is not too far of a leap from what we were studying in the past lecture, behavioral therapy. In fact, it incorporates everything that is in behavioral therapy, with just one addition, which is the addition of the cognition component, the cognitive aspects. But the main key component here that we need to remember, which has so much to do with behavioral therapy also, is that we are concentrated on behaviors, and we are concentrating on changing behaviors, in particular changing behaviors that work for us, and help bring us the rewards of our goals. So once again, all cognitive behavioral therapy shares the same characteristics as behavioral therapy. We collaborate with the client on an individual basis. We are trying to change the cognitions in order to change behavior. We are kind of talking about the stress that is going on cognitively that affects our behaviors. We are also trying to structure and target our problems. So once we've identified what the problem is, we're going to give it a little bit of structure. We're going to come up with an action plan in order to target it. It's a psychoeducational process model. This means that clients have a role in what they do. They are a little more active, proactive, if you will, and that might be simple as following a homework assignment, for example. Primarily what we're trying to do in cognitive behavioral therapy is we're trying to reorganize our statements in order to reorganize our behavior. We're trying to reorganize these self-ideas so that they change our behaviors. If I think a particular way about myself, I will behave a particular way. If I think a different way, I should be able to behave differently. These behavioral practices that we use are kind of shown in ways of operant conditioning, modeling, role-playing, and they can be applied to our thoughts as well. We can reward ourselves for positive thinking. We can reward ourselves for thinking in ways that give us the behaviors that give us what we want. And we're concerned with all those kind of things. And obviously the big question is, how do we change the cognition so that we change our behaviors? Well, one of the ways that we do it is something called REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, REBT. One of the pioneers, obviously, is Ellis. And we work on an ABC framework, much like the triad that we talked about before. This is a triad as well. We have our active event, our active behavior. We have A is the active behavior, B is the belief, and C is the emotional and behavioral consequences of that. And the thing that we need to focus on is B, our belief, affects all of those things. So what we believe affects our actions. If I believe in freedom and justice, then my action might be picking up arms and being a freedom fighter. You can see how the belief, that cognitive component, affects our behavior. And obviously that's the kind of things that we're looking at, where our beliefs come from. We're not so much concerned why, but we just want to make sure that they are adjusted so that they give us the consequences that we want, that they are able to guide us to our goal. And this REBT gives us the tools to restructure our mind. It is said that we get our irrational beliefs from our childhood. Things, for example, like, I'm no good. Maybe once upon a time someone told us, oh, you're no good, or a teacher told you, oh, you're no good. And we believe them. And that became a belief. That became a staple in the way that we feel about ourselves. And because we have that belief, we will then act our behaviors accordingly to that belief. Maybe we'll walk around with a little bit less self-confidence or we won't have the gusto to kind of go after something because we don't believe in ourselves based on something that happened in our childhood. And one of our goals is to destroy these irrational beliefs, to not only destroy these irrational beliefs, but to replace them with something that works for us, something that can help us lead us to our goals. We need to replace these ineffective ways of thinking. And we need to separate evaluations of our behavior from ourself. Blame is at the core of our problems here, and we need to stop blaming ourselves. We need to deal with our imperfections, face the fact that we are not perfect, and that is okay. And because it is okay, we should be forgiven for things that we have done in our past, for all those kind of childhood moments that have helped us structure our beliefs. It's like time to put them aside and say, hey, you know what? It's time for some new ones, some ones that are really going to work for me. I'm going to let go. I'm going to forgive myself. I'm not a perfect individual. It doesn't matter what happened then. I need some new beliefs that are going to work for me, that are going to help me change my behaviors. And one of the ways that we can do that is we can avoid solid beliefs such as good and bad. You know, what is good and what is bad? I mean, these kind of things are argued left and right. And what can be argued by one side can easily be argued by the other side. Oftentimes, in a case of a war, you have two people who both think that they're fighting for good. And maybe in reality, they're both in the bad. So when we sit there and label something good or bad, we're not giving everything the full picture. You know, not everything in life is black and white. There is a little bit of gray. There's a gray area. And without putting things into boxes all the time, we free ourselves of having to be good or be bad. We can just be. We can just have our actions be as they are without it being judged and labeled good or bad. Another thing that we should do is we should avoid thinking about things and even talking about things, the behavior of talking, of shoulds and oughts and musts. So a lot of times when you're talking with a client, they'll say like, oh, I really should do this, or oh, I really ought to do that, or I must do this after this. And you kind of ask yourself like, well, where are they coming from? Where are all these shoulds, oughts, and musts coming from? If there is no right or wrong, if there is no good or bad, then one could argue that there is no should or must or ought to. You know, what's worst case scenario? That you don't, and then what? If there's no good and bad anyway, then it really doesn't matter. So anytime one of your clients says like, oh, I should be a better person, or I should be more loving towards my husband, or whatever it might be, you might want to stop them right there and say, you know, the concept of should, where is that coming from? Call them out a little bit and say, you know, why do you think you should do this? Where is that coming from? Is this coming from one of those childhood beliefs that someone told you that a wife should always be pleasant to their husband? You know, where is that belief coming from? And if we realize that there is no right or wrongs, we realize that all of those beliefs that we've ever held about ourselves are kind of phony, and they're kind of made up. And that, you know, people have given certain things value. And maybe that value is unjustly given, or maybe some of that value needs to be taken away. The truth of the matter is people live in shoulds and oughts all the time. But where those shoulds and oughts are coming from are not necessarily always A, true, B, good, or C, are going to work for them as unique individuals. So we need to kind of evaluate those kind of ways that we live our lives in shoulds and oughts and musts. And say, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you don't need, or maybe there is no should absolute, if you will. Maybe you shouldn't, if you can. Again, we are trying to change our internal language. We are trying to change the way that we think illogically and unrealistically, and most importantly, change in ways that do not work for us. We want to reintroduce ourselves to ourselves. We want to shape our own personality. We want to give ourselves beliefs that work for us and that work for our goals and that are not roadblocks to our end happiness. And hopefully, by evaluating what's going on in our cognition, we can help change some of those behaviors. So once again, we're trying to stop thinking irrationally through this REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy. We're stressing action. We're trying to act anew. We're trying to change our behaviors in the end through the way that we think about things. Aaron Beck with cognitive therapy, which is very similar to REBT. It all falls under the headline of cognitive behavioral therapy. Aaron Beck, who was working with people with depression, was again concerned with faulty thinking. He was also concerned with inadequate references. So, for example, if someone calls you stupid, does that automatically mean that you're stupid? It's an inadequate reference. Maybe that was only one individual that called you that. It wasn't 100 individuals or all of your teachers or all of your caregivers. A lot of times people fail to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Oftentimes people kind of make up this world or actually this image of who they are that is not always accurate with reality. And we need to kind of bring people back to reality and kind of let them know that, hey, life's a little bit more complex than the way that you're looking at things, and maybe you're thinking about things a little bit too irrationally.